Welcome to the Good Day at Work podcast. I'm your host, Matt Liggins, and in this episode, we'll be exploring the nuances of workplace wellbeing with help from leaders and experts in helping to create good days at work. So, what makes a good day at work? Let's find out. Hello and welcome again to the Robertson Cooper podcast. My name is Matt Liggins, I'm General Manager here, and today we're going to be talking about neurodiversity. We wanted to keep the conversation going after Neurodiversity Celebration Week, so if you're listening to this just as we brought out this podcast, that was a few weeks ago, but any time of year round, it's an important topic, which is why we wanted to keep that conversation going. I'm really pleased to have a member of our associate network joining us today, Liz Mulhall, who's an expert on neurodiversity. So Liz, over to you to introduce yourself and say hello to the listeners. Can you tell us a bit about your background and your role?
Yes, thank you, Matt. So I work as a business psychologist and a neurodiversity coach. I was late diagnosed with ADHD when I went back to uni to study business psychology and completed that in 2023. And over the last couple of years, I have a portfolio career. So I realised that traditional employment just wasn't quite for me. So I work with lots of businesses. I have my own business. And so that flexible approach, fluidity to my work works really well for me as someone with ADHD. So my background initially was recruitment. So I worked recruiting for about 12 years, got exposed to a lot of unhappy people, I would say, at work. When you're hiring a lot of people, you're often talking to people that want to move on. So just really quite curious about workplace experiences. Working in sales is quite stressful. So I was very interested in, I suppose, both high performance cultures, but also burnout and stress and the well-being experiences that came from high pressure roles. And so that was really my curiosity that drove me to study business psychology. I was just really interested in what makes really good experiences at work and how does work impact our well-being. That was the core driver. I was wanting to understand more about well-being, and my own well-being was a key driver for that. Experienced quite a lot of burnout throughout my career, which actually points towards ADHD now. So I've got that better understanding of my own well-being through my studies, but also through the work that I do currently.
Fantastic. So yeah, it's great to get your expert take really on neurodiversity and well-being in the workplace. So I guess just to start the conversation and for the context maybe of those who are listening who know a little bit about neurodiversity, would like to find out a little bit more or just starting to build their understanding of this topic. Could you give us a bit of an overview of what we're talking about and what that term neurodiversity means?
Yeah, so neurodiversity is often used, but it's actually being referred to neurodivergence quite often. So neurodiversity as a term is around the collective experiences of everyone. So as a group, as a collective, as a human species, we're all neurodiverse. So we'll all have unique experiences, we'll think in different ways. We also operate within a neuronormative society. And so this assumes that there's a typical way of thinking, learning, and being, and sort of structures everything around that. So we'll often see this in the education system, and this often mirrored in the workplace. There's an expectation of how people will function, how they'll process information, how they'll communicate. And that really benefits and suits people who would say are neurotypical. So they would align with those neuronormative ways of being. And then you've got a group of people who are neurodivergent. And this will be people who are autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, bipolar, epilepsy. So it's not just the more common areas that you might hear about, but it's also mental health conditions as well. So if there's a neurological impact, those people will often be considered as neurodivergent. And so their experiences are quite different. They diverge from what is considered typical or normal. And so their experiences at work are often different because jobs are designed, workplaces are designed to the benefit really, and with neurotypical norms and ways of being as the ideal. So this work, neurodiversity work, is all about raising awareness, understanding, education around what some of those experiences are like, shifting away from the deficit focus. We're often looking at all the differences. So the differences of autistic people, what they can't do compared to others. With ADHD, you've got attention deficit disorders. You've got the deficits and the disorder in there. There isn't really enough focus. We're starting to see a shift towards a focus, but on the strengths and the real benefits that will come from having a neurodiverse workforce, which would include neurodivergent and neurotypical employees. Also, the work looks at educating workplaces to remove barriers that might create well-being issues, performance issues, and just understanding that workplaces are designed in a neuronormative way, and that in itself can be quite problematic for everyone, but particularly for certain groups of people, of which neurodivergent people would be quite significantly impacted.
Definitely. So it's that one size fits all approach doesn't really fit anybody, does it? Particularly those who are neurodivergent. It's not necessarily, we're saying, aren't we, the individual and their challenges that are really the challenges. It's that expecting that individual to do things in the same way as everybody else when their brain just tends to think differently. And it's probably more common that many people in workplaces might realize that someone might be within that spectrum of neurodivergence. It's sort of maybe one in 5, 1 in 6, 1 in 7 at the most, so around 15 to 20% of people, isn't it? So it's sort of lots and lots of people in every workplace are actually going to be neurodivergent. It's not something that workplaces can assume, oh no, there's no one neurodivergent here. So it's everybody.
We're
isn't
everywhere.
It?
Yeah.
As you say, we all think differently, but particularly those who are neurodivergent, sort of in terms of the way the brain works, obviously quite different to the regular, if you like, neurotypical individual in the workplace, and that environment really doesn't suit. So in that typical workplace environment, how would you describe that neurodivergent individuals can feel? And you talked a little bit about there. What might be some of the challenges and the barriers that they might face to their well-being and their health and well-being as part of a normal day in that very typical environment?
Yeah, so through coaching, I feel very privileged there isn't tons of research on neurodivergent experiences at work, but through coaching, it's almost like live research. I have lots of insights to different experiences across different job roles, sectors, seniorities. There's some commonality across that. So generally, the way jobs are designed, there isn't enough thought and perhaps the skill internally to think about the impact, the energy required, just thinking out how we're designing these roles. As you get more senior, the workload sort of piles on. Plus, you've got the responsibility for people. So I don't think enough thought goes into how the jobs are designed for it to be good work. And that can have a really detrimental impact. And one of the things that I see a lot through coaching is particularly on the administration side. So I coach lots of professions, GPs, for example, trying to accommodate to the 10-minute appointment times to be able to process all the information, do all the admin side, the referrals, the bloods. It's just very consuming for them. So people who are neurodivergent can be impacted. Their executive functions can be impacted. So things like initiating tasks, switching tasks, planning, prioritization, those things can be much harder. And so you'll often see administrative tasks, they take quite a lot of executive function capability. And so it's the admin side that can often be the challenge that people will experience. On the people side, I often hear the statement, it's not the work, it's the people. And this can link back to either stereotyped understanding, so an expectation of this is autism, this is what it looks like. So some people might hear you don't look autistic, or are you sure you're autistic? So there's a stereotyped understanding of what it might be like. That can then create a barrier for them. Also, the neuronormative expectations again. So to be able to sit down at a desk from 9 to 5 and to be productive for X amount of hours, lots of screen time, just the expectations can be really quite crippling for some people, and equally the expectations they put on themselves. So it's not just the workplace, it's not just the way the jobs are designed and the workplace is designed, but it's also the expectations and the pressure that people will put on themselves. So sometimes there can be perfectionism, wanting to do things right, things needing to be a certain way. Otherwise, it can be quite stressful. So you've got the individual factors that will contribute, but then also the workplace as well. So it tends to be around those sort of 4 areas from what I've seen.
Obviously, at Robertson Cooper, we provide a lot of workplace wellbeing solutions, and so we're always thinking about things through that workplace wellbeing lens. So if we're talking about that neurodivergent individuals might have challenges because of that typical environment, and that can impact their well-being, does a standard workplace well-being approach, that typical workplace well-being strategy or calendar events maybe, does that tend to benefit the neurodivergent individual, or does it not quite work in the way that perhaps you'd expect it to?
Yeah, generally not, I would say. And I do think businesses, or I like to take the view that people are well intended. They want to do the right thing. They're not going out of their way to cause harm. And a lot of it is under sort of a misunderstanding, really. but generally no, I would say. I think the stress experiences are very different. So research suggests that this was research in autistic children, that their stress levels, so their cortisol spikes higher and it lasts for longer. So there's a prolonged stress response. And so if you think about modern workplaces and work generally, there's very high stress. So there's not really an understanding on the impact of that stress. Neurodivergent burnout is another quite topical area where you've got quite traditional burnout, which will be debilitating, but you've got neurodivergent burnout, which will actually prevent someone from functioning. So they won't be able to do the basic things. It can be more impactful. So some people, a lot of the people that I coach, will be signed off work between sort of 2, 3, and 6 months at a time. So quite significant periods of absence due to burnout. And often, but not always, sort of links to the lack of adjustment. So they might not have the support, they might not have the understanding at work. So I think the stress and well-being, general well-being experiences are different. They are heightened. There can be a real sensitivity. There's often co-occurring mental health conditions, so anxiety and depression, which adds another layer of complexity. But on the flip side, if you were to have someone in playing to their strengths, in a great culture, good work being available, you would likely have really high performance, well-being and engagement. So it's not all negative, and you can really create good experiences for neurodivergent employees. It just takes a little bit of thought, but equally everyone will benefit. So it's good work design or job design, thinking about the culture, the behaviors that are allowed, also the sensory environment. So that can have an impact as well. So some of the people I coach will describe the sensory impact of as being really painful. So the light or the noise or the smells will be firstly quite distracting, but just very painful. They're unable to work or to focus. So being mindful of the sensory side as well, that can have an impact. Just trying to recall the research from Birkbeck Centre for Neurodiversity. I think there's two studies that they've done that looked at neurodivergent experiences, and they linked the sensory distractions as being a contributor to reduced well-being. So this sensory side directly links to well-being, and also psychological safety. So feeling safe, being able to be open and to be themselves, that had an impact on their well-being as well. So the needs are similar to us all, but I would say they were just slightly greater, with a higher risk for more harm. For some, not all, but for some neurodivergent people, work can be quite stressful and quite a negative experience for them.
This is a topic close to my heart as well. So one of my daughters is neurodivergent, as we were chatting about before we joined the call. And as you were talking about there, in terms of just those small adjustments can make such a big difference. Obviously, she's not old enough to be in the workplace yet. I probably look old enough to have sort of an adult daughter, but she's still at secondary school now. But those small adjustments can make such a big difference for her. But just coming into school each day and sort of going through that normal routine that everybody else does, and at school, obviously, a very kind of regimented and structured routine, that is such a challenge for her in one sort of sense, and sort of hugely fatiguing, and sort of those little small kind of tweaks and changes that sort of might be a 5-minute thing for one child, for my daughter then sort of will take her out for 2 or 3 days almost, sort of what she can't get back into that same normal routine. But actually, if that can just be, there's an awareness then for the teacher, and there's a slight workaround for that sort of piece, and even just that recognition of, I know you're going to find this really hard, so I'm going to do this for you, and you do it that way, she's absolutely fine, and she's one of sort of the top performers when she's got that bit of support. Whereas in certain other classes where she hasn't got that same recognition, understanding piece, really struggles. So again, as you were saying, sort of people in the workplace absolutely can be top performers and kind of do a brilliant job with those such small changes. And again, those general principles, as we're talking about, it's things that benefit everybody, because it doesn't mean that sort of being neurodivergent doesn't mean that sort of you're a completely different entity to the average person. It probably just means, as you say, those challenges might be amplified, or there's those need for those adjustments is greater, and some of those well-being factors just turned up a bit. So we touched on some of the things there as well, and you were starting to kind of touch on some of the, whilst we talked about the challenges, some of the ways to navigate some of those things and sort of and create that environment that supports people better. What can workplaces do? What kind of advice would you give, or what kind of examples have you seen of really good practice where people can better support neurodivergent individuals in the workplace and better support their well-being?
Yeah, so I think, again, similarly with wellbeing, I always see lots of overlap and interlink between wellbeing a lot of inclusion work, but neurodiversity, wellbeing, inclusion in general. So it's focusing on like primary preventative practices, thinking about the organization itself, the culture, but also the levels of intervention. So at the team level, looking at the managers, are they trained? Do they understand neurodiversity? And then at the role level, looking at what sort of adjustments, what support can be put into place. So in training that I'll do, managers will want to know a lot of the detail, a lot of the information, and they don't need to be experts on what autism presents like or how to spot it, because that's not their role. And it will be very different for each person. So whilst there will be commonality, the experience is very unique. So it needs a person-centered approach. So thinking about the individual, what is the impact of the environment on them? In terms of the team dynamic, how do they experience that? What's that like? The management style, like what would they benefit from? What are their communication preferences? How do they like to process information? What's their working style? So helping them to identify how they work at their best. I often say this in coaching sessions, that we aren't, I mean, I don't know anyone who's been trained to be a worker. I don't think we're trained to be an employee or how to do some of these things. But there's this expectation that you'll be able to be self-managed, organize and plan your day, do all of these things that some people find much harder. So within management, it's a really nice opportunity just to think about everyone. So how do we all work at our best? How do we all what are our communication preferences? So it's not just centering on this one neurodivergent person who needs to be accommodated. One of the common topics in training is fairness of adjustments. I don't want it to be unfair, and it can be seen that someone is getting an advantage, but it's really not. It's just leveling the playing field. But also, why not give adjustments for everyone? Why not think about how can we proactively support absolutely everyone so it becomes the norm, so that person doesn't feel singled out? But it's just thinking about how can we create the conditions for people to work at their best, being really clear with expectations. So I've got 3 C's: clarity, so being crystal clear on what's expected, what good performance is like, being very concise and clear in communication. I think that's a big barrier. The context of why. So sometimes it can be demotivating or just a little bit uncertain if you're not knowing why. What's the bigger picture? What's the context here? How does this fit in? Why is this work important? Or if you want something to be done a certain way, why? Like, why does it have to be this way? Linking onto that is choice. So this autonomy, agency, how can we create workplace cultures and environments where people can perform in the way that they want, focusing on the outcome rather than the inputs or how they do the job? Let's give them the freedom to choose how they can deliver their work. And again, 3 areas that would benefit absolutely everyone. We just need to be really clear, set the context and give people choice how they can do their work.
And I think, again, what you're talking about, this can apply to everybody, can't it? This isn't some sort of like niche, sort of like unusual way to support people in the workplace. And this is really the kind of conversations that we have on these podcasts really often, that person-centered approach. So important, and you get such benefits from it. Just more important for the individual if they're neurodivergent, because it's, as I said, with the example I gave my daughter, so important for her that sort of not just that one size fits all approach. Line managers, then, we're putting quite a lot of expectation on them to sort of get these kind of things right and to be able to support people in this way. If we talked about some of the organizational, cultural norms there that are important, what kind of advice or guidance would you give to line managers to be able to get this right, so they can help look after their people, get the most from their people, and ultimately it makes their lives easier as well if they've got that high-performing team who feel looked after? What are a few quick things where you'd advise line managers on where to start or where to find further support from, so they can kind of start creating this environment that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think asking people what they need is a really good place. Sometimes they won't know. So people that are late diagnosed won't always know what's helpful or what they need, but sometimes people will know. So just asking, do you know what could be helpful here? Not being afraid to not know the answers, not know what the process is. I think just being quite authentic and honest can be really helpful. Being proactive with adjustments is always encouraged. Not requiring a diagnosis. So there's lots of limitations and barriers to people getting diagnosed, getting assessments and diagnosed. It is a privilege in this day, and with the times, the wait times, and I've paid for private assessment. I know lots of people do. So people won't always have a diagnosis. So sometimes organisations will wait for that or think they need that, but assume that someone, if they think they may be neurodivergent, that they're not going to be making that up. It's not really something that you would make up. So assume neurodivergence if it's suggested. If it comes from them, sometimes there can be, again, another question is, what if I think someone is and they don't know? Or if I see these signs, like, how do I address it with them? I don't think it's really the role to, unless there's a really strong relationship. So if you have a very good working relationship, very open, very honest, they feel very safe with you, then there might be the opportunity to be able to bring that forward. But generally, not to assume, always offer adjustments, and just think about the modifications. Really, for managers, it's what can I do to flex? How can I change a little bit? Because they might have a set way of working or preferred way of working, but it's adjusting to what the needs of that individual might be. So yeah, I think those can be good places to start, really.
Yeah, definitely brilliant advice, and hopefully that's helpful for line managers listening. And I think really, as you said, such a key piece for line managers, whatever topic we're talking about in the workplace, whether it's supporting neurodivergent individuals, whether it's to do with stress, whether it's to do with culture, or generally that performance piece, asking questions and just keeping in touch is so important, isn't it? And I've always advocated, whether it's training sessions I'm doing or whether I've been working with managers over the years, always ask. Don't wait until you see that problem. Don't wait until you've got those suspicions or that person seems really unhappy or unwell or is really struggling. Always ask how people are, what kind of help they need. And as we talked about, there are lots of nuances and lots of different categories, if you like, of neurodivergent conditions. And likewise, it's around 2/3 of any employee have got long-term health conditions aside from neurodivergence. So we're never going to be the experts in all of those different topics. And that's certainly not the role for managers, is it? But what I'd always advocate is trying to be an expert in person. And as you say, it's just getting to know people, finding that out and trying to support that person as best you can. Well, it's been really interesting to chat to you and get some insight there and some brilliant advice, hopefully, for organisations and managers as well. Any kind of quick key summary or takeaway or sort of that one sort of nugget or tip you want to kind of keep in people's heads just at the end of the call here when they're finishing up listening, in terms of how we can better support neurodivergent individuals in the workplace, or where to start?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. When you have a C,
easy question. Easy question.
I have so much information. I'm just trying to select that one nugget. This is what I'm always looking for in coaching. The best question. What is the perfect question to ask here? You know what? A really good question. I love asking this when I do sessions. What do you wish, or what would be important for people to know about your experience of being neurodivergent? What's that like? What do you wish people knew? And the insight that comes from that is just amazing. So it's often anonymous when I ask that question. It comes in a Slido, but just what's one thing about your experience that you'd really like, that'd be really helpful for me to know? And often that can be quite powerful and quite impactful, and sometimes quite emotional, because there's a lot of stigma in the media. There's a lot of conversation about neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and questions on its validity and on its experience. And that really impacts people. And that will often come out around the perception of it and the stereotypes. Sorry, very long-winded answer. But if you can find out what is that, what do they wish people could know, or what's really important that someone could know about their experience, because I think that can say quite a lot.
Yeah, brilliant. And as you say, it's creating that space where people feel comfortable to be able to give that answer. Yeah, and as I say, sort of thinking from my experience in my family, I'd be really interested to wonder what my daughter would say to that question when she's ready to say it. But yeah, great question. I think a really good prompt to kind of let people take away and think about how their team members might respond to that question, and a brilliant opportunity to go and find that out in workplaces. So let's try and keep the conversation going on neurodiversity and neurodivergence in the workplace. It's been fantastic to get your take, Liz, and your expert advice. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll leave it there. Thanks again for listening to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Good Day at Work podcast, brought to you by Robertson Cooper. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Every time you do, it helps us to promote our podcast and increases the chances of others finding the show too. For further details on Robertson Cooper and how our evidence-based solutions drive tangible improvements in workplace wellbeing, mental health, and engagement, head over to robertsoncooper.com. See you next time.